Sundered Doctrine is the second of two dungeons for the Final Shape Dungeon Pass, and our second contest mode dungeon. I thought Vesper's Host was an overwhelming success for a contest mode experience, the first one we've ever had for a dungeon, although the final boss damage fades was really the main reason why this place was so brutal. So, how was attempt number 2 at a contest dungeon? I think pretty good. There were some things that I liked more about this dungeon versus Vesper, and there were some things that I liked a little bit less. This place felt a bit more balanced overall than Vesper. Vesper was overwhelmingly weighted towards the final boss encounter, which ended up being way more frustrating than a typical boss encounter. It was hard, but not really in the most fun way, at least to me. This time around, the big hangup was the second encounter, but I don't feel like it was as brutal as the final encounter in Vesper on Contest. Something that I think was really well done was the placement and selection of enemies. This is the most deliberate that enemy selections have felt to me in recent memory. You could tell that Bungie really thought of the most annoying enemy for any given situation in this dungeon, and I do mean that in a good way. Husks, I think, were the MVP of this place. They were incredibly disruptive during the first encounter, trying to mess with the lenses. Their post-death Seekers hit brutally hard, and in the final encounter, were one of the biggest contributors to death during the damage phase because of the little grenade that they can toss out, exploding multiple times, not to mention being annoying in the left side room with how often they were spawning. Even the final boss trying to pull you out of position and punish you for getting hit was more brutal than I was anticipating. I also feel this a bit in the Nether, where certain enemies feel very deliberately chosen for an encounter. They don't just feel airdropped into every situation at random. The first encounter did not feel like it had nearly as brutal of a timer compared to Vesper. Vesper's first encounter was super tight, 7 minutes, and my team finished with 0 seconds on the clock. This encounter was also somewhat tight, but we finished with over a minute left. So as long as you kept up a decent pace, you were probably going to be fine here. The biggest hangup was really just surviving long enough, which given the enemies here could be pretty brutal. Subjugators hurt, enemies could freeze you, slow you, just kind of tough to survive in there. I think if you're used to this kind of PvE environment, this encounter was pretty manageable. On normal mode, normally this encounter would be some sort of a learning encounter where you would use this lens mechanic later on in the run. You technically do use the lens and the light mechanic very briefly, but what you really end up using is the whole true-false statement situation. Encounter 1 and Encounter 2 combine with both of their elements in the final encounter, which I found pretty cool because it's not usually this even, or feels like kind of even. Otherwise, normal mode is not too bad, and I'm sure as people memorize statements and paths and light beams, this is only going to get easier with time. It's similar to Vesper in that people can split up and almost do their own thing, although you do have to reunite to drop in lenses and all that kind of stuff, which I don't really mind. Neat mechanic, but given that dungeons need to be soloable and that dungeons aren't supposed to be as crazy as raids, this is likely as far as they could reasonably take it. Still some neat stuff that I think you can do, though, with the lenses. There's room to grow this mechanic if they really wanted to bring it back. The second encounter was the main hang-up for a lot of teams because it wasn't really fully understood how it worked until much later in the contest mode weekend, and because people were getting baited by how much damage they were actually doing. There was a bug that showed that you were doing crit damage to this boss, but in reality, you weren't. At least, I'm pretty sure that's what the bug was. Ultimately, the only thing that matters is the health bar at the bottom of the screen, but as long as you had some high-quality options available, Sleeper, Queen Breaker, Anarchy, something along those lines, you should have been okay, although ammo farming felt basically required to succeed for the most part. The core mechanic here is the symbol wheel, where each symbol meant a different thing was going to happen when the boss looked at the wheel, which I think is a pretty interesting concept. Before we even get to that, though, I love the idea of this giant security mechanism trying to mess with you getting through the door. It's like some kind of a vault with a rotating security code that you need to enter. I think it's a really cool idea. And just the visual of it, I thought was also just awesome. The spawn in animation, it was great. I would say that most people got stuck here because there was a lot of misinformation out there about like what does what on top of the stricter damage requirements. Also, once you have some kind of a strategy that will enable you to deal enough damage to the boss, you tend to stop progression on mechanics and instead just try to beat the boss down, because on contest, it ultimately doesn't matter if you truly figured out the mechanics or not, but rather if you killed the boss. That's the only thing that matters. So those first few hours were people maybe thinking they knew what they were doing, and maybe some teams did, but for myself, as soon as we had enough damage, we just did whatever we thought we needed to do to progress the fight and kill the boss. I did not really find that super satisfying, and I would have enjoyed actually figuring things out, but it's contest mode. You just gotta get the boss down however you can get it down, and then you can figure it out later. Otherwise, contest mode was pretty brutal because of all of the punishments and the lack of understanding of how these punishments came to be. Having to fight back-to-back waves of ogres, for example, was incredibly brutal, although you did need them and the knights to farm some ammo back at some point. Well of Radiance did a lot of heavy lifting here, as there can be a ton of damage going out during the damage phase, depending on what your symbols were. Now that I actually know what's going on in this encounter, where you need to limit the amount of bad things happening to you and do micromanaging of the wheels and the symbols and all that, I definitely appreciate it a bit more. It's like you're really fighting the boss the entire time instead of just during the damage window. The boss is actively trying to mess with you and punishes you for not interacting with the symbol wheels. But you're also kind of creating your own boss fight at the same time, and I wish there were some triumphs in-game that make you do certain combinations of symbols and still clear the boss or something. I kind of think of Yogg Saron from Ulduar for my WoW heads out there, where you had the light in the dark achievements, where, you know, as you reduced the amount of help that you had during the fight, it made it harder, but your loot got better and you got these achievements and all that kind of stuff. I love a novelty boss like this. It's just something you don't really see coming, and a concept that hasn't felt like it's been very explored to this degree, even on normal mode. I mean, look, the ogres still hurt on normal, okay? Like, a bad combination can still mess up a team. I do also like that you can just gamble on a speed run of this encounter by throwing in kill on the left side immediately and going to a damage phase. If you want to take the risk for a big time save reward, that's cool. If you don't, less risk for a slower kill is also a nice option to have, even down to where you place the kill symbol. The further right, the less time you get, but the less stuff you have to deal with. I was a little frustrated by the big panels, even during the normal mode, until I really locked in on what they actually do. But they also feel like sort of a bait, like a red herring. When you lock in a symbol to the big panel, it feels like something that you should be able to count on in some way. Like, it's locked in there, I put it in there, okay, cool. But even in the final moments before you're headed to the damage phase, you cannot rely on those panels being what they say they are, because the boss will still mess with them when you start the damage phase if you didn't interact with the corresponding wheels. At first, I thought they did literally nothing at all, and it's very easy to assume that when you're sitting in a Well of Radiance, because you're just not gonna die. But seeing that the panels affect what the boss does during the damage phase, I appreciate that a little bit more. I guess just being able to lock in stop, stop, stop without having to think about anything afterwards would have made the experience pretty simple, or just not as punishing. So the final boss, I thought, was going to go one of two ways. Either Bungie was going to lean into what they did with Vesper, or to a lesser degree the Witness, where the damage phase was, again, super active, super crazy, or they were going to dial it back after some feedback about how Vesper is a little bit insane. And dial it back they did, to the point where it feels like a more normal damage phase, which is something we actually haven't had in a little while. I definitely would have preferred something more like The Witness, where, you know, there's a bit going on, but if you know the dance, you can just keep damaging without a ton of issue. There's a skill element to it, to memorizing what you need to do. The dance here is mainly sidestepping the boss's strand pull attack so that you don't get wombo comboed, which is fine, but definitely not on the level of The Witness or Vesper. For most people, I imagine going back to something a bit more normal is very welcome. I was surprised at the health pool of this boss for contest mode. My team had several unfortunate 1% wipes on this boss, and had any one of them gone our way, we would have done it in a 2-phase. A 2-phase was very much on the table for this boss for many teams out there. I'm wondering why this wasn't as much of a damage check as I feel like I was anticipating or expecting. It felt low for a contest experience, even with someone just holding down M1 on Divinity. The main mechanic isn't terribly difficult to deal with, turning on and off the symbols to make the wheel in the middle glow with the false statement on the board. The hardest part of this on contest was just figuring out the mechanic, which my team was fortunately able to do somewhat quickly. Some of the combat portion got a little dicey as well, though. The threadlings hurt pretty bad. Something that did get a little frustrating, though, was having the boss waiting for you outside of the door on the left side, because you just didn't really have a ton of room to work with. The stomp was almost a death sentence, and it took me forever to realize that that was the thing that was suspending me, because I was trying to jump over his head 40 feet in the air, and it would still hit me. Otherwise, the fight wasn't that bad on contest mode, and considering what Vesper's final encounter was, I think they dialed things way back in comparison, maybe almost too much of a dialing back. I was anticipating a more intense damage check, not being able to 2-cycle this kind of easily. However, this could be Bungie trying to make a slightly shorter solo experience, as getting to the damage phase doesn't take nearly as long as some previous encounters, or at least it doesn't feel like it will. I haven't stepped in there by myself just yet. In terms of the post-dungeon experience, the quest was time-gated this time around, and I'm not really sure why, because, like, Vespers wasn't time-gated as far as I remember, so yeah, I'm not really sure the deal with that. The first few steps have just been about hunting down some worms in some secret areas within the dungeon and punching in a couple of codes at the base within the pyramid, so whenever I do the secret video, I'm sure we'll talk about it more. And yeah, the solo experience, I'm guessing the first encounter is going to be a little bit tedious because of all the lenses you're going to need to collect and all the running around you're going to need to do. The second encounter seems very brutal, but I've been hearing some strategies going out that might make it a bit less brutal. Again, haven't been in there just yet myself. The final boss seems like it will not be nearly as bad as some previous bosses. The area is small, the mechanic isn't too difficult to complete, and the boss, while they are trying to kill you, isn't trying to do so in the same way that the puppeteer was, so that's kind of a relief. Overall, I think both dungeons from this year's Dungeon Pass have been incredibly good contest mode experiences. I'm incredibly happy that Bungie did them, and I hope they continue to do them going into the future, especially considering it doesn't seem like we're going to be getting 2 dungeons a year going into the future. I'm still not sure if this dungeon has become like my new favorite dungeon or anything like that, but I still did really enjoy it on normal mode, and I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the post-dungeon secret stuff. I'm not expecting another Giga puzzle or anything like that like we got in Vesper, but, you know, I certainly wouldn't say no to it. Let me know how you're feeling about this dungeon. I'll be working on my solo guide over the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.